sifting is most of the time pretty unnecessary. Back in the day, you had to sift your flour because there were probably like rocks and stuff in it. But that time has passed. Today I'm gonna show you how to make a coffee crumb cake. It's a great cake because it's super versatile. In the summer, you can use blueberries or raspberries, and in the winter, you could use cranberries. It's very customizable, and it freezes beautifully. In this chapter, I'm gonna show you all the ingredients you need and exactly how to measure them. I'm gonna show you how to make the crumb topping and the batter, and then put it all together. First, we wanna preheat our oven to 350 degrees. And now we can make our crumb topping. We're gonna start by making our crumble topping. So we'll need flour, and we're gonna do it the scoop and sweep method. We'll aerate our flour with a big spoon, and then scoop without packing it in, and then sweep. This is a pretty big cake, so it has a lot of crumb topping. I can't say this enough. It's basically the most important thing about baking, I think. Measuring your flour correctly. A cup of brown sugar. Now this one, the opposite of flour, you always pack your brown sugar. This recipe calls for dark brown sugar, but you could swap in light brown sugar if that's what you have available. Cinnamon. I love ground cinnamon in my coffee cake, but you could swap it out for something else. Ground cardamom would be really nice. Wouldn't use this much, a little bit less, but that would be a nice spice. In the fall, you could do pumpkin pie spice. That would be really good. Now we'll mix this together. You could use this crumble on top of your muffins. That would be really nice. You could use it on top of a smaller cake. Honestly, it's so tasty. If you just bake it on a sheet pan, you could put it in your granola or sprinkle it over ice cream. I want my crumb topping to have a different texture than the rest of the cake, and I find that melted butter is the way to achieve that. It doesn't look like it's enough. It's enough, I promise. And if the fork doesn't work to mix it all together, you can always get in there with your hands. Clean hands are kind of the best tool you've got. So use them. It is still a crumb topping, so you can see it's still sort of crumbly. And now we'll add our sliced almonds. I really like the ones that have the skin still on them. I think they look the prettiest. But sometimes in the supermarket, all you'll see are the ones without. That's fine too. There you go. So I'm just using my hand so that I don't break up the nuts even more. And that's it. Now we can make our cake. So we're gonna start with our dry ingredients. Scoop and sweep again. I'm gonna say that 1,000 times until it's burned in your memory. You can do a fun experiment if you don't believe me. You can go in with your cup and measure your flour and then weigh it, and then do it this way and weigh it again and see what the difference is. If you measure too much flour into your cake, you're gonna end up with dry, sad cakes. Now we need our leavener. So we're doing 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. And we need salt, 3/4 teaspoon of salt. And now we'll whisk that together. Make sure all of your leavener is evenly dispersed. I don't sift my flour. I really don't think it's necessary. If you give it a good whisk, that does the job. Now we'll set this aside, and we can go to the mixer to do our sugar and butter. In my mixer, fitted with the paddle attachment, I'm gonna add my 1 stick of unsalted butter at room temperature. You can see it's perfectly soft. And 1.25 cups of granulated sugar. And now we're gonna cream this. We're looking for a nice, fluffy, pale yellow mixture. If you see that your mixture is too yellow, it means you haven't gone far enough. If you see that it's super white, it means you've gone a little too far. So we're looking for somewhere in the middle. That'll take about 3 minutes. The temperature of your butter actually really matters when you're making different things. When you're making a cake and you're trying to cream the butter with the sugar, what we're doing here is cutting air bubbles into the mixture, essentially, so that when the cake goes into the oven, we get some bubbles that grow in the oven and create a nice, fluffy, light cake. In something like a biscuit or a pie dough, we really want our butter to be cold because we want to maintain nice cold little pieces of butter that melt and create steam in the oven, and that's going to lift your layers of pastry. Melted butter is really good for things like crumble, where you want to get rid of some of that excess moisture, and you just want the fat so that you can create something nice and crispy and crunchy like the crumb topping on this cake. I'm just gonna scrape down my bowl. I like to do that one time about halfway through. That's been going for about 3 minutes. So now we can add our eggs, but I wanna show you what it looks like. So that is properly creamed butter. You can see it's pale yellow, it's not white, it's nice and fluffy, and that's gonna give us a nice, fluffy, delicious cake. So now we can add our eggs one at a time. And we want them to be room temperature because if they're cold, we're basically gonna chill our butter back down, make it cold, and we're gonna lose all those beautiful bubbles that we just worked so hard to incorporate. Just do one at a time to make sure they incorporate nicely. Scrape down your bowl. Always crack your eggs on the surface, not on your bowl, so that you don't get any pieces of shell in your mixture. I love that color. It just looks so creamy and beautiful. Now we'll add a tablespoon of vanilla extract. Always look for pure vanilla extract. It doesn't matter if it's inexpensive or expensive, just make sure it's pure. Now we'll add half of our dry ingredients to the mixture. And the idea here is that we're going to try to coat the flour with fat before we add our moisture. And that will cut down on the gluten formation so that we'll have a nice tender cake. I'm not gonna overmix it though. Scrape down the sides of the bowl. Okay, so now we'll add our sour cream, again at room temperature, because we don't wanna chill that butter up that we've worked so hard to incorporate nicely. Sour cream is so nice because the acid in the sour cream and the fat in the sour cream both contribute to a nice tender cake. I think it's kind of the perfect thing to use in a coffee cake. Keeps it really moist. That's it. I don't want to overmix my batter. That's really important to keeping a nice, tender cake. Okay. Now that I've mixed this, I'm gonna go get my fruit from the freezer. I'm using frozen wild blueberries. Wild blueberries are my favorite for baking because you can see they're really little and they're really delicious. They taste like blueberry to the 10th power. They're that much more flavorful. That said, they're actually pretty hard to find. Out of season, even in season if you don't live in New England. But you can buy them frozen pretty readily. And if you're gonna use them, you wanna keep them frozen. You don't wanna thaw them because basically all the liquid is gonna come out, they're gonna be mushy, and then all the liquid is gonna get into your cake. It's gonna make a big mess. So keep them frozen. It is going to make your batter a little bit stiffer. It is gonna take the bake time up just a hair. So keep an eye on that. If you don't wanna use frozen fruit and you wanna use fresh fruit, that's fine too. Fold that in just as you would. Take the bake time down a little bit, just keep an eye on it. So into the batter, I'm using 1.5 cups of these beautiful frozen wild blueberries. 1.5 cups of berries in there. And it is a pretty stiff batter. So here I have a 13 by 9 inch baking pan lined with parchment and buttered. I like a nice, thin, light colored pan for my cakes because I think they conduct heat the best, they don't retain heat for too long, and in a dark colored pan, sometimes you have a dark crust builds up, and you don't want that in a coffee cake. So I think generally these nice, thin, light colored pans are your best bet. I also love to use these metal binder clips that you just get at the office supply store. They're perfect for clipping down your parchment so that when you're baking it, nothing flies over and falls on top of your cake. We'll put this batter into the pan. It's swirled a little bit, but I don't mind that. I think it looks kind of pretty. That always happens with blueberries. Now we will just spread this out to an even layer. It's a pretty thick batter and it gets even thicker when you add the frozen fruit. So make sure you use an offset spatula to make a nice even layer. Isn't that pretty? The swirly fruit. I think it's nice. It's not always gonna happen. Now we can get our crumble and we'll do another 2 cups of fruit on top. It's a really loaded, fruity coffee cake. That's how I like it. And now we can put our crumb mixture on top. I like to just sort of squeeze it into some clumps as I'm putting it in, so we have some larger pieces and some smaller pieces. Yum. It's really loaded on there. It's a lot of crumb. Now this goes into a 350-degree oven for about an hour, hour and 15 minutes. You can check it by putting a toothpick into the center. It should come out basically clean, sometimes with a few moist crumbs. If you're not using frozen fruit, start checking your cake maybe around 45, 50 minutes just to make sure that nothing gets overcooked. Oh, it looks perfect. Golden brown. Okay, let's test it. Clean. Okay, now we can let this cool and then we'll cut it and serve it. I think this looks so beautiful. It's golden brown, the top looks crunchy, the nuts are toasted. I can't wait to dig into it. I'm gonna just loosen the sides that don't have parchment. And I'm gonna use the parchment to very carefully lift it out. Look at that. And now that it's on a cutting board, I can cut it beautifully and serve it. I think a serrated knife is actually the best way to cut this because you have all that wonderful crunchy topping to get through. You don't want to smush the cake at all. Can't wait to show you the inside. Look at that. So many blueberries all the way through. It really helps to sort of split them up and put some in the batter and some on top so that you get a nice even distribution. I think it looks great. It's tender and moist. I think that's my favorite thing, the contrast between that wonderful crunchy buttery top and the nuts and then the really soft buttery blueberry cake. It's so nice. It's so chock full of fruit and it's so tasty. I think any fruit that you use in here would be perfect. In this chapter, I've shown you all the ingredients you need and how to measure them properly, how to make the crumble and how to make the cake, and then how to put it all together. Now it's your turn to give it a try.